Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Zimmerman, and I will be your moderator for this session. Before we get into introductions, I'd like to start with some tips to participate. So please use the Q&A box to enter your questions for the speakers, and we'll address them as we can. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we will discuss your questions with the speakers. To engage with your fellow attendees, please use the group chat feature. If you experience any technical issues, please email support@mig.cc for assistance. So I'm going to get the ball rolling now. As robotic-assisted surgery continues to expand into more specialties with more surgeons trained to perform Da Vinci procedures, the need to formalize structure around the technology grows. While many hospitals and health systems have matured their robotics programs into service lines, there are still many who have not yet taken that approach. I think we can all agree that robotics is here to stay, and hospitals and their leaders need to be prepared to build a robust service line around the technology. This session will address the needs for such structure and the experiences these leaders learned from building in their respective robotic service lines. So I'm going to begin now then with some introductions. If each of you could take, let's say, 20 seconds to really, introduce yourself and allow our attendees to better appreciate your perspective. So Dr. Mark Delworth, let's begin with you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Delworth. I'm a urologic oncologist by training. I am also the director of minimally invasive and robotic surgery at TriHealth, which is a $2 billion 5-hospital system in greater Cincinnati. I have been doing robotics since 2003, and I also have an administrative hat that I wear at TriHealth. I am the system chief of surgery for that healthcare system as well. So thank you. Enjoy being here today.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Dr. Delworth. Mary Beth, let's turn to you next for an introduction here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Antone. I am the Associate Vice President of Operations at Silver Cross Hospital. Silver Cross is located in New Lenox, Illinois, which is a southwest suburb of Chicago. I have been responsible for surgery since 2010, and we launched our robotics program as a late entrant into the market in 2012. Among other things, I have other areas of responsibility, but robotics is one of my favorite. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here, Mary Beth. And Dr. Jonathan Vlez, we'll turn to you now to round us off here.
Hi there, I'm Jonathan Vlez. I am the Chief Operations and Physician Executive at Gulf Coast Medical Center. We're located in Fort Myers, Florida, and part of the Lee Health System, which is a 5-hospital system located in Southwest Florida. I'm also the executive sponsor for the robotics program, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you, Dr. Velez. And with the introductions here set, let's dive into the first question for our panelists here. So I think a lot of our viewers, attendees today will want to know, what do we mean when we use the phrase task force? So it's common for hospitals to have a steering committee, but I just want to ask each of you to briefly describe the structure of your programs and define what does we mean when we say task force. If you could share specifics on structure, membership, and the purpose of your program. Dr. Velez, perhaps you want to kick us off here.
Sure. So when I talk about task force versus steering committee, a task force to me really means a force that has been put together that has a specific task to accomplish, and that task has a beginning and it has an end. So for us, we used a task force when we were in the process of putting together the business plan and doing the analysis around our robotics program here. We had folks on the task force who were from planning and strategy. We had physicians on our task force. We had members from finance, from marketing and communications. We even had some folks from performance excellence who are really just great support folks for us in terms of putting together business plans. And our job was at the time to generate a business plan and decide, does it make sense for us to move forward with this or not? And obviously we did. And as a result of that, once we were able to get all the approvals that were required and we started the implementation process, that's when the task force sunset and we moved into more of a steering committee. And the steering committee for us has been meant to be a lot more long-term.
Gotcha. That's a helpful distinction there. Sort of the finite nature of a task force is an important distinction. Thank you, Dr. Velez. Mary Beth, same question to you then.
Sure. I echo a lot of what Dr. Velez said, that from a task force perspective, we're actually looking at a specific a specific item that we need to fix, something that we need to analyze, something that has a beginning and an end. So for example, at Silver Cross Hospital, we do have a steering committee for our robotics program. It's comprised of any physician that does robotics that would like to attend. There's no exclusivity. It's you come and go. And we do have those that are there quite often. And it's quite frankly, our high volume physicians that really have a lot of investment in the program. From a task force perspective, we might look at quality, we might look at patient satisfaction, we might look at the cost to do business. And one of the examples early on in our program is looking at standardization of instrument trays and really kind of educating each of the individual practitioners how we could standardize to help save money. Because at our organization, we have a program called the Midwest Institute for Robotic Surgery. It's pretty much a virtual group of physicians who have to meet certain quality, service, and cost expectations, and then we market them. So we basically then, any savings in the program, we put into marketing that Midwest Institute for Robotic Surgery. So again, steering committee large, looking at overall running the program, very long-term, and on a task force side of things, a short project looking at a specific goal in mind that has a beginning and an end.
Right. So again, the timeline there, but also the specificity, sort of
Yes.
a little bit more expertise involved in that. Dr. Delworth, any additional comments on this piece?
I think it's very, very similar in terms of the steering committee. We have a physician leader, the robotics coordinator, executive support, and then data. Data person is really key to that. So those are the four components. And then we have other people, OR management, central supply, et cetera, that are there. In terms of the task force, we use that more of a strategic initiative. So if we're going to try to increase our market share, if we're going to try to do something different, that's when we're going to bring in the CEO, the CFO, hospital presidents, and we're going to, and certain strategic physician leaders to strategize about a goal that we have in mind. And it's all data driven. Where do we want to go? What is the data support? How do we get there? And then we try to accomplish that goal.
Yeah, a specific goal that's measurable, right? There's data involved in the whole process. Thank you, Dr. Delworth. Dr. Velez, I want to turn to you now for this next question, where I know your program probably has gone through the most recent transition to a more mature adoption of robotics as a service line. What were you in the health system trying to achieve, and how did the design of your task force play an important role in that whole effort?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from our perspective, what we were looking for was to try to understand what it was that our community needed from us from the perspective of care. And so when we created our task force, we were looking at some specific questions. One of those questions was, what is the community looking for in terms of local care that they feel or perceive that they can't get here locally and are traveling for? And so in order to understand that, we added to our task force communications and marketing folks who were actually able to go out and use Google Analytics and other tools to be able to determine what are people searching for, and are we able to provide that here or not. In addition, we were also trying to create a context and a background with these folks so that at some point later on, we could update our website and make sure that we had that information available to patients. And then in addition to that, really looking with our strategic planning folks and really understanding more about leakage. If we understand what we heard from Google, then what can we understand about what's actually happening in terms of leakage? And we started putting that information together. In addition, we had various surgeon champions because we wanted to make sure that this wasn't really just simply buying new tools, but this was, how do we want to create a program around this and create some sort of vision at the same time as we're meeting the needs of the community. So that's essentially how we put together our group. Now, as time went by, we added on finance, we added on many others into our task force. And over time, some folks came, some folks left. But in the end, the goal was achieved and ultimately the program was approved and the investment was made.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Velez. And Dr. Delworth, I know your program was an early adopter of robotics and sort of bringing about this service line structure we're discussing today. So as Dr. Velez just described how a task force sort of allowed for the allocation of resources, I'm curious if each of you can sort of take a moment and discuss what the right resource you had access to and how that person helped crystallize the vision of your respective programs. Dr. Delworth, I'd like to start with you, and then Dr. Velez, you can hook on as well.
Sure, I think it's a great question. I think it really starts, honestly, with executive buy-in. And that because you're not going to go anywhere if you're starting a program without that. And it's really selling them of your vision. And it's a vision that you have to be committed with and passionate about. So why do we need to support you in the first place? Why do you want to do robotics? And you have to let them know about your passion for improved patient outcomes and shorter hospital stay and improved functional outcomes. And then once they have the buy-in, once they understand the why, then they can support you with some of the resources you need. And really a turning point in our development was data analytics. There was a lab technician who actually ended up getting his MBA in healthcare economics from Xavier University, and we were able to wrangle him into doing our data management for us, and it really was very, very helpful. And I would encourage to try to get a dedicated person to do that. I think it was 0.2 or maybe even 0.5 FTE, but that really was a turning point in our program.
Absolutely, that data piece, again, huge. Thank you, Dr. Delworth. Dr. Velez?
So I would echo a lot of what Dr. Delworth said. I think it all began with a vision, and that vision was crafted by surgeons. It was crafted by operations, and it was the initial sort of barrier of entry into the process of getting the resources that Dr. Delworth mentioned. Once we were able to define the program from a vision perspective, and we were able to secure senior leadership support, then we were also able to secure some bandwidth out of our Analytics Center of Excellence, and we're able to then, during that period of time where we were bringing in robots, et cetera, building a dashboard that was able to tell us everything from utilization of robots to quality metrics, readmissions, financials, everything. So that once we were able to go live and we got 6 months into it, we went back to the senior leadership and helped them understand, hey, this is what we got from our investment, and this is where we're still moving forward, and this is what we need to kind of take things to the next level.
Thank you, Dr. Velez. And Mary Beth, I want to get your perspective here as well. You know, Silver Cross, you guys were late adopters into the robotic service line, but I'm curious how you perhaps use that as an advantage to building your program.
Well, the start of our program coincided with the building of a new replacement facility. We our Silver Cross Hospital is about 110 years old. And the building that we were in was incredibly old and not conducive to a lot of people wanting to come there because they like shiny, brand new. So interestingly enough, it was our executives who worked behind the scenes that decided that in order to be competitive as we moved into our new space, that starting a robotics program, which is something that, you know, the surgeons on our staff had been doing at other hospitals because, you know, surgeons are on staff at more than one hospital. And we opened our building, our brand new facility in February of 2012, and we launched our robotics program in April. And we did so with the support of, obviously, the executives who made this investment. I think the robot was stored in some secret location for about 4 or 5 months before even I, as the administrator over the OR, knew that we were going to be launching the program. But what I think happened for us is Silver Cross has a unique culture. We work with our physicians on pretty much everything. We involve them in the process so that there's buy-in on the back end. So being a late entrant meant investing time and energy into hearing what the surgeons had to say about, hey, where you are currently doing robotics, what would you change? How would you like to see Silver Cross's program be different from your perspective as a surgeon? And our steering committee was comprised of a lot of surgeons who had an interest early on in doing just that. At our competitor across the river, since that is one of the, there's a hospital that has a system that has a hospital across the Des Plaines River where they had been doing robotics for years. And when they came to us and said, well, over there, they do this and we would prefer you do it differently, we were actually able to get them to buy in early on and then help us build the program as a team, not an us versus them, but really what can we do to provide, I think it was Dr. Delworth, who said earlier what our community needed. And when you build a shiny, brand new hospital, folks look to see that you have shiny, brand new, really cool tools that enable the caregivers to do a really good job for the patients.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the executive leadership, again, being so important, but also bringing surgeons to the table and letting them have influence, just huge. So this next question for Dr. Delworth and Mary Beth as well. You know, hindsight is of course 2020. I'm curious what, if anything, you would do differently from your initial program and how it was designed. Dr. Delworth, you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, I think what Dr. Velez said was really critical is I wish I would have had the foresight that he had, but he developed the program and then gave feedback to the executive who sponsored it basically, and 6 months later. And that's really important. You know, we start off with various pillars. It was you have to walk before you run. So we start off with quality and making sure we're doing great quality surgery, and then efficiency comes next, and then financial really kind of comes after that. And you have to go through those 3 steps. And we really didn't give enough feedback, both positive and negative, to the investment that they had made. That's one thing I would do differently. The second thing I've realized over time, and this is partly as my other administrative role, is the power of physicians and collaboration. So administration tends to be very hierarchical. When a CEO walks in a room, everyone underneath them knows who's boss. When a doctor goes in a room, we acknowledge that there has to be a committee chairman, but we're much more collegial and collaborative in the way we develop. And when we brought in, we were going to do a fleet upgrade, for instance, and we brought 30 robotic surgeons together over 3 sessions and then presented our ultimate plan to the administration. And when you have 30 docs can't agree on what they have for lunch, much less how to upgrade robots. And so that was really powerful. So don't underestimate the collegial and the power of getting everyone together on a common trainer theme is really powerful for your program.
Yeah, the power of consensus, right? 30 docs agreeing on something that carries weight. Mary Beth, same question to you. Anything you do differently?
I think actually we would have spent a little bit more time, 2 things, a little bit more time planning for the future. We launched the program very quickly after we moved into a new hospital, so we were learning a lot of new things. But I think we underestimated the growth of our program, quite frankly. And fleet management was something that was pretty tough in the beginning. We had a pretty packed OR. We were growing by double-digit growth every year. We moved into a newer market, and a lot of folks wanted to come to our place. And I think we were not as well prepared from a strategic launching of how do we add to our fleet. I think we were always a little bit like one step behind where we needed to be. We've caught up in the meantime, but I think we would have spent a little bit more time on, okay, we're going to launch, and then we need to evaluate a little bit more frequently because surgeons did get a little frustrated with access to the one robot that we had at that time. The other thing I would have done differently, and this is in part due to our culture at Silver Cross, we got a lot of really smart people here. We think, we can do this by ourselves. I think we underestimated the assistance that Intuitive could have provided us with some of the hiccups that we had early on. So we did do the Genesis program. We, have worked with our PSRs very closely, and that relationship has grown over time. But I think we were a little standoffish, right down to the fact that we didn't invite anyone from Intuitive to the steering committee at first. And I think we probably could have had some additional insight to operations had we done that.
Important point there to really take advantage of all those resources versus this sort of taking it all on your own shoulders, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that, Mary Beth. Dr. Velez, I want to get a little bit more granular here with you. Can you talk about how your task force and steering committee sort of functionally work? Who does what and when, and which group has governance and sort of standardization issues? Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So here at Lee Health, our System Robotics Steering Committee is the committee that has the overall governance, oversight, and standardization responsibilities. And essentially, we have placed people on that committee strategically who can speak to those particular areas. So obviously, we have our System Robotics Medical Director who chairs that meeting, and then we also have folks from our analytics department who can actually help us with seeing the data and seeing what things we need to pay attention to. And then we also have the champions from each of our hospital campuses who also sit on that committee as well, and then our operational OR directors. And essentially that committee is really right now preoccupied with safety. And what we're trying to make sure is that as we have a lot of surgeons coming into robotics, some of them for the first time ever, that as they learn and they progress, that they've got the support that they need to be successful. And that in the process of us standing up a program that's designed for community benefit in mind, that we're in fact benefiting the community and not having any issues in terms of creating more quality issues than not. Our committee is responsible for standardizing across the system. So one of the areas where we standardize is around credentialing and privileging and then re-credentialing when the cycle comes along. And so we want to make sure that the requirements that surgeons have to begin to get their privileges are the same at each of the campuses. And we've kept the barrier of entry sort of continuously high to make sure that there's enough volume that's done in a credentialing cycle so that they can continue to do that kind of work. We've also tackled some pretty interesting issues with our committee. We've looked at transoral robotic surgery being done with a system other than the SP. And that committee really had to take a look at that and do an in-depth analysis, looking at all the literature, having conversations with the surgeons who had been trained and were eager to do this, to first sign off to say, okay, there's a subset of this that can be done safely. Let's move that through. And then that went through the standard process through our credentials committee and on. And then finally, that committee is responsible for reviewing the dashboard. So as we look at our dashboard and we look at utilization, or we look at surgical site infections, we look at conversions from robotic to open, what have you, that we're having those conversations, understanding where there may be some opportunities to improve. In addition to that, we have facility operational committee meetings as well. Each of the campuses is very different, and the challenges they're experiencing are very different. So those surgeon champions at that campus lead the local committee, and then they'll work through any local operational issues that they may have or any direction they get from the system committee. And that's how we've structured things at Lee Health.
Thank you so much for laying all that out for us, Dr. Velez. Mary Beth, I'm curious, how does the description differ or match up to the program structures you built?
Well, we do. I am so fortunate that I don't have to worry about robots across four hospitals, 4 campuses. That would be pretty tough. The one little hospital that we have and the 4 robots that are in our OR, speaking to the credentialing process, when a surgeon joining our staff or that desires to do robotic surgery, or a surgeon on our staff who has recently trained and wants to join, the credentialing criteria, that candidate is actually seen by the robotics committee first, and they make a recommendation to the credentials committee as to whether or not that person should proceed. So they look at their case volume, they look at their training records. For those that have done robotics elsewhere, obviously quality is a large issue as well. So in that respect, we have that standardization, although across just one hospital. One of the things that we do a little bit differently as it relates to the quality is, I referenced earlier our Midwest Institute for Robotic Surgery. So surgeons who want to be a part of the Midwest Institute for Robotic Surgery do have to meet a minimal criteria for their specialty first. That's the gateway to entry into this program. Once they've met the criteria for a volume for a specific period of time, it's a 12-month period, our fiscal year, then we look at their customer satisfaction, which is part of who Silver Cross is. We rely heavily on those statistics, as well as their conversion, their SSI rates. And they have to meet X amount of criteria to be able to be, included in this program. I think that has been one of the things that has drawn surgeons to our hospital, that we do market them this way. And when they come to the committee, again, we review all surgeons who desire to be in this program and look at all of that criteria as well.
Thank you, Mary Beth. And Dr. Delworth, how does the description Mary Beth has shared and Dr. Velez as well match up to what you've done?
It's very similar, and I wouldn't rehash what our program does because it's very similar to theirs. I think the one aspect I would say is that the common themes you were hearing was quality, 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 right? We're going to make sure that patients are safe and well cared for. And one of the struggles, I've been medical staff president, one of the things that you have to do is make sure that this committee operates within the construct of the medical staff. And so I think it's important that the committee work with whatever the quality committees are on the medical staff to make sure that those are done, kind of oversight is seamless and it's done in the appropriate fashion, because you don't kind of want to have one arm doing something without the other arm being aware of it.
Thank you, Dr. Delworth. And I want to stay with the program at TriHealth for a little bit here. So, over the years, have you seen periods where maybe enthusiasm for the task force and or your steering committees has maybe diminished or waned? And Dr. Delworth, if so, how do you sort of keep the scissors sharp, so to speak?
Sure. I mean, it's like any relationship, you kind of have to add new things or change things along. And they were at a Harvard Business Review talked about stretch goals and people that are doing well but complacent. And it's easy to kind of put it on just cruise control. And then, so I think you have to kind of constantly look at your program with a fresh lens. And the way you can do that is to go to conferences like 360 or different conferences that Intuitive has, because you find out very collaboratively what other people and other programs are doing, and then you bring back that information. And that may be a new service line. We started thoracic oncology. That's been great. We now have a minimally invasive fellowship that we have. A year ago, we brought robotic procedures into the outpatient setting and have a dedicated robot in the outpatient space for that. Do you want to have a center of excellence? What is the new challenge that you want to bring to your program that is not only going to elevate it, but it's going to challenge and inspire the people that you have doing robotic surgery at your program?
Yeah, it's important to have fresh eyes, right? And bring those fresh eyes back to your program by doing, the kind of thing we're all doing right now. Thank you, Dr. Delworth. Mary Beth, how about you? Can you talk about any evolution you've seen at Silver Cross's program?
Absolutely. I would say one of the most exciting things is that we do have surgeons who host other surgeons for training. And I think that kind of pumps up the docs and it pumps up the staff. Makes them feel really good about what they're doing. And when you've got a surgeon from another facility that perhaps is just here to learn a new technique from the surgeons that we have as site hosts, we hear a lot about what they do in their program, and we are able to ask them questions and kind of pick their brains on, what are you doing to revamp your program, or what challenges do you face that maybe we can help you with. That's been really exciting for us. And in the last year, we became an enriched site, so we're able to share some of our processes with others that are interested in knowing how our program has evolved. I think, too, our marketing department does a phenomenal job of telling stories. So we don't market a piece of equipment. We don't necessarily market a surgeon, but we market a patient who has benefited from a surgeon who has this technology available to them. So we're constantly asking the surgeons to tell us stories, to see if we can interview one of their patients. And obviously during the pandemic, it was a little more difficult, but we did a lot of things on our Facebook page. When a surgeon meets a specific milestone, 1,000 case, for example, we market that, and it kind of pumps up the rest of the group to say, I want to have that stretch goal myself. I do want to say too, though, I think both the doctors have echoed on the quality side of things. We are an organization that is seeking to have zero harm in our hospital. We employ a wide array of safety tools and tips. And again, the safety of our robotics program far outweighs the number of cases that we could do. And we do share those stories to say, this is a surgery that can be done safely. This is a surgery that can be done with an incredibly talented surgeon who has this technology available to them.
Thank you so much for that, Mary Beth. And before we get to a couple of audience questions, I want to ask each of you about sort of assembling the right team. It seems like such a crucial part of this. So, and by assembling the right team, I do mean at the task force level and sort of the steering committee level as well. So I want each of you to, if you could just weigh in on what is the best way to keep these teams on task with achieving the strategic goals sort of you outlined at the beginning of your programs. Dr. Velez, we can start with you on this one.
Sure. So I think from the steering committee perspective, what I would say is you're really looking for folks that share the passion for the vision, that have a sort of unquenchable desire for safety, but then also can be champions and try to help and encourage others underneath them to be able to do more with robotics maybe than what they've been able to do before. We're looking for those kinds of folks that are fairly dynamic and can help us do actually what Dr. Delworth was talking about, which is asking the question, what's the next thing? What's the next higher way for us to, improve this program and bring it to where it needs to be? We're actually in the process of looking for a medical director right now, and those are the kinds of things that go into what we're looking for. Now, we're looking for someone who's obviously experienced, and we want someone who's got good quality metrics and that their surgical site infection levels are low. All those things are important. And we also need to have someone who can really lead the team, inspire the team, and continue that growth of the program, maintaining safety as the foundation. So that would be what we're doing with our steering committee.
Thank you, Dr. Velez. Appreciate that. Mary Beth, why don't you go next?
I'd say the same thing, especially at the steering committee level. I think we need surgeons to attend that meeting to help to affect change. Those that aren't afraid to challenge the status quo, and quite frankly, to challenge one another, and even across specialties. I do think, too, on the operational side of things, having a robotics coordinator who is at the sharp end where the patient is cared for, that can translate what happens in the OR up to the steering committee, because those are two different scopes, if you will. It's very easy to listen to a surgeon's perspective and their lens on things, but then as an organizational leader, I need to understand really what is the truth behind all of that, and how can we better serve those surgeons. So two things: a great medical director that can keep the team in check, committee members who can challenge one another, and then a robotics coordinator who can really bridge the gap between what's happening at the sharp end and those larger decisions that are being made about how to grow and sustain a quality program.
Thank you so much for those details. Really struck by sort of the dynamic nature, as Dr. Velez sort of pointed out as well, of the folks you have to have involved, where good is clearly never good enough, and they're always pushing for better. Dr. Delworth, why don't you close us off on this question?
Sure. I think it's important for the leadership, especially surgical leadership or others, to be a servant leader. I think it's really important to really put the organization and the program ahead of themselves, so they're not just kind of allocating block time or doing this or that, or things that sometimes steering committees can do that aren't really for the benefit of the program. And the other is really to make a distinction between a leader and a manager. Those are really two different things. And you really need a leader. A leader has vision. A leader can look over the dashboard and see what's coming a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, and they can dream. And then get a data person. I know I've said this several times, but data validates the vision. Nothing validates a vision like data does. So the visionary who is supportive of the program and the data person that can validate that vision is really what I think are the keys to a successful program.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Important distinction there between managers and leaders, right? Thank you, Dr. Delworth. We've got just a few minutes left, but I want to make sure we get to at least a couple of audience questions. We had some great ones come in over the course of the session. So the first one I'll put out there, we've talked a bit about data. I think any three of you could speak to this question. The attendee asked, what data would you start with? Like most programs, we look at a few basics, mostly volume of procedures. Where would you start and who would you lean on? Anybody want to jump at that one?
So I'll go ahead and start. For our program, we really chose that based on, the quadruple aim and what our organization is all about at its foundation. So we wanted to make sure we had patient experience metrics on our dashboard, wanted to make sure we had operational metrics, financial metrics, but really, and we've talked about this over and over again, lots and lots of safety metrics. And so we understood that getting the program off the ground, we were not going to be able to get everything that we would ever want on a dashboard right up front. But when we thought about it, we thought really from a safety perspective, let's make sure we get good validated quality data on things like conversions from robotic to open and for surgical site infections. And let's start with those two. And we have a whole laundry list of additional ones that we want to get over time. But then we also decided that we wanted to look at things like our length of stay and make sure that from a robotics perspective that we're meeting what we said we were going to do for our patients in terms of what they can expect with their length of stay. Readmission rates, making sure that we continue the quality from the perspective of making sure that those folks aren't coming in at any higher rate than other surgical patients. And then, yes, there are the volume metrics that we do pay attention to, that everyone pays attention to. We want to make sure that the program is actually growing and that we do have surgeons taking new training that they've never done before, or maybe becoming new to the robot in the first place, and just making sure that that's actually happening. And then from a financial perspective, making sure that from the perspective of the equipment that we're using, the rates that we're using it, the supplies that we need, are we really taking care to make sure that we're doing this at the best cost point that we possibly can? And that's where we started. And I expect that that is going to evolve a lot over time as this whole laundry list of additional metrics, which we prioritized as phase 2 and then phase 3, ultimately come to reality as well.
I have to just echo all the same metrics, most definitely. And, starting small with volume, really, you're going to make this investment. Surgeons are excited to use the robot. You want to make sure that it's getting used. So the only thing I would add, on our dashboard, we do utilization, and that helps us with fleet management. How do we know when we need to make an investment in an additional piece of equipment? Are we really utilizing the robots that we have to the best of our ability? But again, all those other metrics, start small with volume. That's a basic, and just build from there. Ask at the committee meetings, what interests people? What would you like us to add to the dashboard? Then I'm sure there are things that those of us who are involved in the program, if you ask somebody from the outside, there might be something that we hadn't even thought of.
And I would just add that I think the dashboard can be a little bit different. There's programmatic dashboards, and there's kind of a dashboard for an individual surgeon, and they're a little different, and they morph over time. For instance, if I've done over a couple thousand cases, whatever it is, 3,000, I'm going to try to decrease the amount of instruments I use to save a couple $100. I don't want the person who's starting on their first 25 cases to do something like that. I want them to be safe. I want them to take as much time as they need, and I want them to have good outcomes. And then you build. So I think that those kind of dashboards really do change over time and progress with experience of the program and experience of the surgeon and the team.
Just one more final audience question here before we close out. The attendee asked if you are a tenured program with a limited but long-lasting structure of a steering committee, how do you really get the support needed to revamp that program? Dr. Vlez, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say on this one, and then Mary Beth and Dr. Delworth, any final comments from you on it as well?
Sure. So I guess the way I would start with this is, what we're trying to do in our program is make sure that as time goes by, that the program does not get stagnant. And one of the things that we have done to make sure that we not only have surgeon support and support across senior leadership, one is to make sure that the system committee is actually getting things done. So we've had surgeons that have come to us and said, I've got a concern about this way that we're privileging these kinds of procedures or those kinds of procedures. And by taking that into play and having a conversation about what's the quality safe thing to do, and then creating an outcome that's favorable in the end, the surgeons know that this is just not some place that they're going to come and just hear the same data over and over again, but this is a place where real action gets taken that can be done in a quality manner. And then also what I mentioned earlier is we go back to our senior leadership every 6 months to talk to them about the outcomes that we've created versus what we committed to at the very beginning. And that makes sure that our senior leadership knows about this program and hears about it on a regular basis, and helps us so that as we start to develop additional action plans and things that we want to do, that they are supportive of that as we move into the future. So those two things are things that we're looking at here at Lee.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Velez. Mary Beth, what would you add to this?
Well, I'd just like to say that whenever we have a new surgeon who either joins our medical staff that is robotically trained or someone on our staff who is learning how to be robotically trained, I personally invite them. I kind of dog them. Please come to the steering committee. We need a fresh face. We need some fresh perspective. And that has worked. I mean, they're excited to be invited. They didn't know that it was something that they could just attend. It's an open membership. And then for those who do attend, who tend to be the broken record time after time after time, we invite them to come with solutions. Look at the things that you're concerned about and think about it. Go back between meetings and come up with some solutions on how you might be able to change things. Work with the staff in the rooms, work with local leadership in the operating room, and then come back and tell us about your success. And they seem to enjoy that challenge. I just think engaging the surgeons to be involved and let them know that, hey, listen, we make decisions at our organization with your input. We're not going to make a decision without your input. So own it. Come to the meeting and talk about it.
Great points. Thank you, Mary Beth. Dr. Delworth, close us out here.
Sure. I think you can, it's always easy to restructure around a new theme or a new event. So if you're getting a fleet upgrade, or if you're getting some sort of a transition, I think that is a natural reason to restructure. And then some of the perhaps more senior surgeons that are a little recalcitrant to leading, I've always used the approach that could you help me mentor a future leader? And so bringing that future leader in, and that provides a new broad, letting the older person exit with dignity in a mentorship position really accomplishes the goal without kind of anybody kind of losing faith or having any adverse consequences from it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Delworth, and thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you, Dr. Velez. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and thanks to everyone in attendance. You will now have a quick break to get to your next session, but please do remember to complete the survey at the end of our time here. We're constantly looking for new ways to improve. Thank you so much for joining us.